Hey guys, another reviewer here. Now, as you already know, I really enjoy video games, but what you may not realize is that I also enjoy shitty movies. I have done some shitty movie reviews in the past, and I figured I would ease myself back into that by going into the genre that keeps on giving whenever it comes to shitty movies, which is horror. And I think I really found a treat for you today. Stay Alive, a 2006 slasher flick starring John Foster, Samaire Armstrong, Sophia Bush, Frankie Muniz, Jimmy Simpson, and Maria Kalinina. The film was directed by William Brent Bell and written by him and Matthew Peterman. It should be noted that I'm talking about the theatrical release of this film, as that was the one that I had access to. I did see the unrated DVD when this movie came out, and I did notice the differences, but they really don't matter. It's like two different characters that give you a bunch of plot dump. It doesn't really make any difference or make the film make any more sense. At the start of the film, we're shown that a production company was basically created around this film, followed immediately by a jump scare ripped off from The Grudge and very poorly made game graphics. I get to say that. This movie came out the same year as Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion and Half-Life 2 Episode 1. What perspective is this? The game switches from first person to third person quite erratically. I get the other bits can be counted as cutscenes, but I need some consistency here. The player character ends up being chased by a woman from a painting, witnesses a number of horror tropes, and ends up being hung by a chandelier, causing a game over. We now get to see the player's face, Loomis Crowley, portrayed by Milo Ventimiglia, who is visually unnerved by the game and calls his friend to ask him to come over. His friend happens to be Hutch, who also happens to be the main character of this film, who blows him off and says he'll be around during the weekend. Loomis, being the very picture of courage at this point, starts hearing noises and goes to investigate. He finds his friends, whom he'd apparently found their in-game avatars dead, porking. Did you get it? They're having sex, but he's also wearing a pig mask? Oh, come on! That's a double pun! Loomis has nightmares about his in-game death, which makes him wake up suddenly. His light doesn't work, so he takes his lighter with him. This is significant because we have to know this is his, I guess. After he's frightened by his own reflection, he starts hearing something similar to a vibrating controller. We see a figure following him as the noise continues. He notices the figure and runs to his friend's room to find that they've been horrifically mutilated before a chain hanging from the ceiling grabs him by the neck and he dies in a very similar fashion to his death in-game. I was actually pretty confused the first time I saw this. I mean, first of all, if you blink, you're gonna miss the reveal that his friends are dead. But you never actually see them play the game, let alone die in it. I mean, I know it's mentioned, but I kind of missed that because I was preoccupied by the fact that he wears a pig mask during sex. I mean, after watching this film a few times, I still don't understand the significance here. I'm trying to figure out the significance of a man wearing a pig mask while having sex. What has this movie done to me? We join Hutch as he's brought into his boss's office. At first suspecting he's in trouble with how frustrated his boss is, he starts to guarantee he'll get to work on his reports when Miller proceeds to verify the walkthrough he's been following to beat Silent Hill 4. This dialogue is incredibly bewildering, even when they're on the same page that they're talking about video games. This always seems to be a problem with movies that touch on video games or other sorts of technology. They always seem to think that they can just make up their own lingo instead of using the actual terms that apply to the things they're talking about. Anyway, Hutch gets a phone call about Loomis's death, so he immediately goes to the funeral where a strange woman takes pictures of him because he seemed to be the saddest person there. Loomis's sister approaches him and gives him a bag of Loomis's stuff. The strange girl, whose name is Abigail, gives him her number if he needs to talk. He proceeds to go to an internet cafe run by his girlfriend and her brother, October and Phineas respectively. Phineas immediately reveals himself as a brash, fast-talking jerk. I like him. They discuss what had happened while Phineas and October go through the bag Hutch was given. It's revealed that Loomis and Hutch grew up together before Phineas finds a lighter and starts playing with it. We then see Hutch having a flashback of him as a child caught in a fire, establishing that he's been traumatized. They discover the game he played the night he died, Stay Alive. It's revealed that he was beta testing it, and this excites Phineas, who wants to play. He refers to it as barely legal and insists that they play immediately. Then he starts to go into how he used to beta test and it started out as awesome but then became monotonous. So, what does he want here? It just seems like these characters will mash two different statements with two different meanings into one sentence just to cover the writer for what's going to happen in the next scene, as if he doesn't actually know what's going to happen. We move on to Hutch's apartment where he's washing Solo cups, because I guess you can do that. Does that even count as product placement? And because nothing creepy has happened for about 7 minutes, Hutch starts hearing noises. He goes to his door and looks through the peephole for a jump scare. Oh my god, it's Frankie Muniz! Run! Run! He remains in the middle no more! He reveals himself to the audience as incredibly socially awkward before everyone else shows up, including Abigail. The moment Phineas sets eyes on her, he starts hitting on her. Once they're all set up to play the game, Phineas and Swink, Frankie Muniz's character, have an odd interaction that I can't understand at all. When they cut this film for theatrical release, they cut it for a PG-13 rating, which means they had to remove most of the gore, the drug abuse, the foul language. But this is a slasher film, man. That makes it make even less sense than before. And the worst part is that most of the scenes in this film still make reference to those that were cut out. So instead of reshooting or anything like that, they just use shots where actors mumbled their lines incoherently to cover what's not there. Anyway, it turns out Hutch's boss is playing with them, so he logs on to the generic DRM game server that this game apparently has with username Bellman. We find out it's the developer of the game when the group finally fires it up. You know, Bellman, William Brent Bell, and Matthew Peter Men. You have no idea how much I hate myself for noticing that. The players are presented with the Prayer of Elizabeth, but can't do anything else. Abigail points out that the group has to recite the prayer in order for the game to start. Hutch begins to do so, and the text starts to disappear, so the rest of the group recite it, much to Phineas's excitement, to butter this muffin. Please tell me this was a Weird Science reference. Actually, no. Don't. This movie has not proved itself worthy of a Bill Paxton line. The game has an expository narration explaining that the players have made a grave mistake as they have been marked for death. The game takes place in Garouge Plantation of Countess Elizabeth Bathory, and their task is to uncover the mystery behind her murders. October expresses that she'd already heard the story behind the game. I have too. See, because Countess Elizabeth Bathory actually did exist. She was a 16th century Hungarian noblewoman and murderer who was actually recognized by the Guinness Book of World Records as one of the most prolific female murderers in all of history. Her and 4 collaborators were accused of torturing and murdering hundreds of young women. Being a noblewoman, she never actually saw a trial, though she was eventually imprisoned in a windowless room in 1609, 5 years before her death. Then it was revealed that she had vampiric tendencies, up to and including bathing in the blood of virgins to retain her youth. Being that these accounts were recorded after her death, they were mostly regarded as unreliable. So, what does this have to do with video games? How does it fit with her victim count that we know of so far being 2 men and only 1 woman? I really couldn't tell you, and the movie doesn't put much effort into it either. They confront a ghost child, which everyone is too cowardly to face, except Hutch, who nervously fights it. Oh, if that's all it takes for you guys to choke, you are so fucked! The ghost child drops a rose, which they are informed will help them stay alive. All of a sudden, Swank and October know all about it like it's some actual real-life lore. Despite being too much of a fucking pussy to even start playing, Phineas bitches about the pace of the game before we switch to a fever-pitch battle between the group and a lot more ghost children. Upon entering the plantation, Abigail notices a secret door in a wardrobe that Hutch enters. Miller, who seems to be exhausted, is searching tunnels under the house. Separate from the rest of the group, has managed to find a torture chamber. He's momentarily distracted before getting stabbed in the throat by the Countess. Immediately after dying in the game, a shadowy figure runs across the halls, which he notices. He mentions it, and Swink starts going off on perceptive reality, retinal memory, and other conditions that can occur if you find yourself too immersed in the game world. That's when they all decide to log off for the night and go their separate ways, which leads to Miller doing the most ridiculous shit I've ever seen a grown man do as he's going through his office. I only hope they have security cameras and the night shift guy is watching and laughing his ass off at this idiot. He locks up his office, but then goes for his keys, which he drops in time for the shadowy figure to appear and disappear. After shaking it off, he goes to leave. Why did he get his keys out of his pocket? This movie just did it again. It just fulfilled both conditions for two different scenes that can follow this one. Does this movie even know what it wants to do with itself? He hears the vibrating noise that normally signifies trouble to find it's his controller. We then get a brief glimpse of the Countess as she attacks him. Hutch goes to the office the next morning to find the police investigating the murder. He reveals to the detective that he was talking to Miller a few hours before over a video game, and that he only lives 10 minutes away. The detective's douchebag partner thinks out loud that would put Hutch at the scene of the crime. We then see the body immediately followed by Phineas finding Miller's avatar's body in-game. His corpse is laid out in the exact same way. Phineas, not being particularly close to anyone that had died, wishes to continue to play the game, but everyone else is feeling quite squeamish about it, being 4 people have died while playing. He ends up telling everyone to piss off so he can play in peace. Hutch and October are hanging out on a balcony before Abigail comes out to check on Hutch, while October is being a catty bitch. They ask what Abigail's story is, and she describes an ideal life, growing up in Georgia and going to Princeton. This is when October lights a cigarette and Hutch has another flashback of being stuck in a fire as a child. Swing starts overanalyzing what could be happening to perfectly replicate Miller's in-game death in reality as Phineas starts playing again. He's about to get run down by a carriage, so he brings out a mirror that breaks. Remembering that the Countess didn't like mirrors, he flips it around to find at the back of the mirror is another mirror that she can't break. This is important. Kind of. Hutch decides that the game is, in fact, what is killing people. So they rush to Phineas, but it appears that they're too late. He's actually taking a rip from a bong under the table. Hutch starts to get into what he has realized while Phineas interrupts and mocks the idea. He's kept the game paused so that he hasn't actually died yet. I was wondering what his plan was here. I mean, sure, the mirror didn't break, but it didn't seem to be stopping the carriage either. We switch to a scene where everyone is doing their own things. Swank is working on a PC build, Phineas is putting speakers in his car, October is cleaning cappuccino machines, and Hutch is shaving. They all hear strange noises as Swank's keyboard starts to bleed and he gets it all over his face. October sees a reflection of a zombie, Phineas nearly gets hit by a truck, and Hutch's eyes roll back into his head and the mirror breaks in front of him. It turns out all these things were hallucinations, so Swank, despite claiming to have read all about perceptive reality, does a web search on the subject. Hutch then goes to his office to Google public files on his friend's murders. I guess October and Phineas's internet cafe didn't have a printer, and it just doesn't feel real unless you can slap police reports down on the table, you know? While he's there, he's being stalked by the same zombie-like figure, and hears the vibrating sound. He goes back to the internet cafe where everyone is, except for Phineas, and starts getting into how everyone died exactly how they did in the game. October starts to explain how every single bit of this lines up with stories she heard from her grandmother about Elizabeth Bathory. Except it doesn't, because so far she's killed 3 men and only 1 woman, though granted the woman she did kill had her blood drained, but that doesn't make any sense because we know from the first scene catching her and her boyfriend bumping uglies that she's not a virgin. I mean, hell, they were lubing up for round 2, so to be honest, they were probably caught in the act. At any rate, she explains that the Countess was walled up in a tower on her own plantation and swore she would be back, so this game was her way to get vengeance. But of course, that's just way too crazy for Hutch to accept. I mean, he's already come to terms with the fact that there's a video game that is killing his friends one by one. But to say that that has any basis in history, oh, that's just a bridge too far. I mean, come on, Sid Meier didn't make this game, so you can absolutely fuck right off. I mean, Jesus Christ, what is with the chemistry between these characters? They're supposed to be dating. What did they do, swipe right before Hutch walked into the internet cafe? Oh, wow, you're Phineas' sister? He happens to be my best friend, too. Small world, huh? Actually, speaking of Phineas, she has more chemistry with Phineas than she does with Hutch. I don't even want to get into what that could possibly mean. But listen, we can just give Hutch the benefit of the doubt right now and say that, maybe the game doesn't mention the Countess all that often, right? Oh, wait, yes it does! As the group gets more anxious as to Phineas's whereabouts, we join him singing along to his new stereo system in his car. For a guy that just wants to play the game, he sure does dick around a lot. He's belting out air supply when fog happens. He notices his rearview mirror is broken, which distracts him long enough to not notice someone standing in the road, which causes him to swerve, nearly hitting a tree. It seems that both are hallucinations. He calls his friends and lets them know what happened. He asks Swink about perceptive reality, then immediately shuts him up, then mumbles incoherently about something else that's probably a drug reference. It's always this fucking character. Whenever he makes references to drugs or a scene that was taken out of the film, they use the take that is the most incoherent. It's fucking infuriating. I even resorted to using the closed captions just to try and understand this asshole, and they just skip shit. Like, there are things that aren't in the captions that he says. They refuse to try and interpret his mumbling. So, even with the closed captions turned on, you don't get the full spectrum of the insanity that is Phineas's dialogue. Before they go to get him, October mentions he didn't die in the game, something he celebrates, even though he didn't buy their theory about dying in the game before. Literally nothing has happened to convince him of the idea since he brushed it off earlier. His celebration, however, doesn't last long when he starts to hear horses in the distance. He laments that the Countess only comes at night before he gets run down by the carriage from the game. The group finds him as it switches to his game over screen. They show the detectives as Hutch attempts to explain it to them. Surprisingly enough, the detective doesn't believe him and begins questioning him about how he lived with Loomis after the incident with his parents. The detective and Hutch walk off while the detective's douche partner decides to start playing the game and reads the prayer despite Swink's warning. The detective then threatens to take Hutch in if he shows up at another crime scene, implying that he's been hindering the cops from doing their jobs. Except he's not. I mean, he's always been as helpful as he could be. You can literally say anything else to him, like, "Stop killing your friends!" The douchebag cop dies in the game, then asks the detective why they don't just haul him in. Still hanging out at the scene, despite having the detective tell them to get lost, Swink freaks out, and October proceeds to blame Hutch for bringing the game into their lives that killed her brother. Man, October is such an asshole! She claims that Phineas is all she had in front of the guy she's supposed to be dating. Jeez, what did I say about this bad chemistry here? Fuck, Hutch should really see where he stands right now. Buddy, listen, you should hit on Abigail. It's what Finn would have done. October sends Hutch and Abigail to find out what they can about the game, as the douchebag cop goes to a game store to follow up on the game. The game store clerk has never heard of it, and mentions about it being an underground game. The clerk gets really weird, so the officer leaves and gets in his truck. We go through the motions of him seeing the zombie-like creature through his broken rearview mirror, vibrating controller noise, scream, and blast of blood all over the windows of the truck. She's killed another man, and her motivations are video games. She's killed one woman. A woman that is known in history for killing 600 young women has killed 4 men and 1 woman in this movie. At Loomis's home, Abigail and Hutch try to find a way in. Hutch reveals that he would run here when his home life was getting bad. Eventually, he ended up living with the Crowleys after his father set fire to his home in a jealous rage, accusing his mother of cheating on him, which she wasn't. He was saved by a fireman, but his mother died in her bed, which is why he's so afraid of fire. I wonder what he thinks about firemen, though. They get in, and Hutch finds a cell phone and a computer tower with the address of the game company. You know, I've noticed that they do web searches for, like, everything in this movie, so why didn't they do a web search for the name of the developer at the beginning of the fucking game? Swink searches for where the address is and tells Hutch and Abigail how to get there, while October explains she's been reading a witch hunter's handbook. She explains that you have to bind her spirit to her body by putting nails in her heart, neck, and forehead. Then she can be destroyed by burning her blood. Again, Hutch is skeptical of the supernatural, despite the fact that a game is what's causing all of his friends to be murdered. October continues to explain that a strong enough spirit can be revived if the right passage is recited. And by that, does she mean the passage at the beginning of the game? I mean, the Countess isn't really the one that's doing all the killings yet. It's some zombie clown thing. Who revived that? The cops show up at Hutch's place where October and Swink are, so Hutch tells them to meet up at Loomis's place, so the two escape down a fire escape. In case you didn't figure it out already, Abigail and Hutch have a super short scene discussing how the diary in the game was the text to bring back the Countess. Now it's Swink's turn to have a bad case of the fundamentally stupid when he thinks the prayer bringing back the Countess doesn't make sense. Listen, I know October can be a bitch sometimes, but you really need to quit rolling out every goddamn word she says. Abigail notices the game is running on Swink's laptop as it shows October's character walking around outside. October, not with the rest of the group, notices the zombie thing in the window of a home being built. Swink denies starting it up as him and Hutch question the rules of the game, and they realize the game can play itself as they rush off to find October. Okay, so if the game can play itself, then what's the point of letting people play the game in order to die? I mean, I still don't understand how this ties in with the motivations of Elizabeth Bathory, as it doesn't. But why have that extra step of having the game here when if the Countess wants to kill someone, she's proved that she can just do it? October is in pursuit of this zombie thing. First she finds shackles, then she finds a hammer and nails intending to bind her to her body. She eventually finds a nail gun, deciding it would be much more efficient. It turns out nail guns don't work on ghosts, so the nails go right through her. For someone who claims to have been reading up on all this, you must have just been skimming it. I mean, Jesus Christ, you're supposed to use the nails on the body, not the spirit. You said this yourself. It's super obvious. What is this, plot convenience or just plain stupidity? She attempts to flee, the shackles grab her and drag her back to the Countess where she's hung upside down and swinging before the Countess slices her throat. The rest of the group, hearing the struggle, find her dying. Hutch blames himself and tells Abigail she shouldn't have gotten involved. This is when she confesses that her family isn't as ideal as she claimed and that she lives in her van. They decide then that they have to do something, so they decide to find the developer to investigate. Swink decides that while Hutch and Abigail are doing that, he can play the game as a decoy since the game is going to play out on its own anyway. In the unrated version, they've already been in the house, and this is where they run into the developer who tells them a bunch of shit, and then they leave here to find the writer of the book that October has been using for her information. The programmer is played by James Haven, and the writer is played by Alice Craig, giving credit where it's due. I wondered why that motorcycle was parked there if no one actually lives here. Anyway, they enter the house and immediately hear the vibrating controller noise, so Hutch goes to investigate, leaving Abigail to find a porcelain doll of the Countess. Swink has made his way outside of the plantation in-game and realized that the house they were in is the plantation. Swink starts to direct Hutch as Abigail decides to explore on her own. No! Don't do that! I mean, I can believe you're doing that because you're incredibly stupid, but don't do that! Abigail finds the hidden wardrobe doorway she'd noticed in the game as Swink leads Hutch to the cemetery behind the house. This is when Hutch realizes they are, in fact, at Garouge Plantation. Through the wardrobe, Abigail finds a study devoted to information on Elizabeth Bathory, including her shears and her diary. Then she hears the vibrating noise and everything goes dark. Swink leads Hutch to where she is, but Hutch is stopped by a padlock on a door. Now, if you thought the fact that this game could play itself was where this movie was going to hit rock bottom, just wait until you see what happens next. Hutch mentions needing a crowbar or something, so Swink drops one on a step in-game and it shows up in real life. That's not even the only time this comes up. I mean, just give it a minute. First, we get to watch Abigail panic at absolutely nothing for a whole 10 seconds. Then Hutch comes to a locked door, which Swink, who must be one of those gamers that picks literally everything up. Can't say I know anyone like that. Has a key for and unlocks the door in the game, so of course it swings open for Hutch. As he makes his way to her, she's being held down and menaced by the Countess's shears. You can't fool me, movie. With how long it's taking her to get murdered, you know she's meant to survive. Swink decides to try something and tosses roses at the Countess and the ghost holding Abigail in the game, and they disappear in both the game and reality, which allows Hutch to get to her. They embrace each other and he kisses her. Because that's appropriate. It's at this point that Swink walks away from the van and reiterates that they need 3 nails and roses. As he's explaining this, his controller starts to vibrate, the van doors swing closed, and the game unpauses itself as the carriage is bearing down on Swink's character. Oh, come on, movie. We saw that death with Phineas. Give me something original. Swink manages to tap a button on the controller, which causes his character to dodge the carriage and run off. All during a single button press? Did he pause the game during a QTE cutscene? He breaks a window of the van to get back to playing the game. Abigail and Hutch run down some stairs, then a shadow washes over Swink's character in-game, then him in the van, so he flees the van for no reason. He's seriously in no clear danger, so if the goal was to get him out of the van, then why did the movie go through so much effort to get him back in the van? Swink runs from nothing, Abigail and Hutch run out of the house for no reason, and after Swink has already been running for roughly 20 seconds, the carriage appears directly behind him. He falls into a bed of roses and gets entangled. The carriage actually pulls over in front of him, and the Countess gets out to menace him with her shears before Hutch and Abigail discover his game over scene. So if you die for real, you die in the game? Hutch collects nails while Abigail collects roses before the carriage shows up and starts chasing them through the cemetery directly to the tower. Hutch closes Abigail into it to face the carriage for some reason, but manages to dig a rose out of his bag, which causes the carriage to completely dissipate and the rose to puff out. He then enters the tower, where they enter a crypt. Once at the bottom, they start hearing the vibrating noise as the Countess runs screaming out of the darkness with shears in hand at them, but Abigail throws a handful of rose petals at her and she disappears. I know she ran up to Miller earlier in the movie to get him, but this scene just seems silly to me. It's like they pulled the actress aside and said, okay, so you've seen those self-defense classes, right? Well, here's what I want you to do. I want you to just act out every attacker ever in those things. Just hold the shears up above your head and just run in there screaming. Being they have more elements from the game to shoehorn into reality, about half a dozen grudges pop out from the walls and start running towards our heroes, so they drop a rose and slam a door in their fucking faces. They find themselves in the torture chamber where they get separated. Abigail insists that Hutch go on without her and finish this. He gives her a rose and she gives him the lighter to burn the witch's blood. He immediately finds the corpse while Abigail is doing the he loves me not thing with the rose he gave her, and the petals burn away on the floor. You know, the rose! The thing that's absolutely crucial to her survival. Why is everybody in this movie so fucking stupid? Hutch starts nailing the corpse, and Abigail continues to be an idiot as darkness enfolds her. She screams in futility as she gets hung upside down. It sure would be handy to have a rose right now, wouldn't it, you dumb bitch? The Countess shows up and again takes her sweet fucking time killing Abigail before Hutch hammers in the final nail, binding her spirit to her body, causing the Countess to disappear again, allowing Abigail relative safety and conveniently knocking over an oil lamp. At this point, he starts packing up as he hears the nails start hitting the floor, being that the Countess is up, directly behind him, and likely fucking pissed. He's a selfish lover. Okay, listen, that's my last necrophilia joke, I promise. At this point, Hutch finally takes something October had said seriously without someone else having to tell him afterwards, and decides to use the top of Swink's laptop as a mirror since she didn't like to see herself growing old. She screams for a long time, and then he grabs Loomis's lighter and sets her ablaze. Man, post-mortem gonorrhea is the worst. Okay, sorry. That will be my last necrophilia joke. Unfortunately, the whole room goes up, causing him to have PTSD flashbacks to the traumatic experience he had as a child, which renders him absolutely useless as he screams into the fire. When all hope seems lost, Swink bursts in, brandishing a rose bush with Abigail close behind. They rescue Hutch and escape as the Countess's body burns. We cut to the game store where the tweaked-out employee is unpacking the shipment. Instead of going through the box and stocking the shelves, he takes out one copy of Stay Alive, pops it into a PS2, even though generic Atari noises are being played behind him, and proceeds to play the game so that it can be seen by all the customers. The prayer is heard to be spoken by the cast of the movie. So because they said the prayer, no one has to anymore? Every time somebody boots up the game, they just hear our cast recite it as part of the game? Actually, does the game have any effect anymore now that Elizabeth Bathory's been taken out supernatural style? Well, I don't have any answers for you because credits. In the end, you finally realize the game had no bearing on people living or dying so long as they followed the rules that the game explains. The whole thing was just a way to trick people into saying the prayer, and once they did that, they were meant to die at the hands of the Countess. Whether they lived or died in the game didn't matter, so why the movie took such great lengths to make the game out to be what causes everything was a waste of time. Once you learned that the in-game rules applied to reality, the game no longer mattered, so why doesn't the prayer show up anymore when the game was actually released? Even better, who would release this game? And what happened to the detective? His partner was murdered. Do you really think he'd just stop the search for his suspects if they just jumped out a fire escape? Was that? They're not here. Ah, fuck it, we'll never find them. Hey! Let's go get some donuts and commit brutality on minorities. That'll really cheer me up. Except he's African American, so that joke doesn't actually work.